When you hear the word design, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Maybe sleek smartphones, minimalist furniture? Well, what if I told you that design isn't some modern luxury, but actually one of the oldest, most fundamental human survival skills? Okay, let's dive right into this, because our story starts way, way before computers, or even cities for that matter.
So let's kick things off with a big question, and I want you to forget all the famous names you might know. Who was the very first designer? Who was the first person to look at a problem, really see it, and then invent something completely new out of thin air to solve it?
You got it. The first designers were our prehistoric ancestors. And their work wasn't about aesthetics, not at all. It was a straight-up matter of life and death. Every single object, every image, every shelter had one critical purpose. You could call it the ultimate form of user-centered design, because if the design failed, the user didn't just get frustrated, they might not make it through the winter.
Okay, so imagine trying to share really complex information like hunting strategies or when the seasons are changing or even spiritual beliefs, but you can't write. You have no written language. This was the first huge communication challenge our ancestors had to solve. And their solution? Well, they turned cave walls into the world's very first art galleries.
And listen, these were not just some random doodles on a wall. This was incredibly sophisticated design. You take Lascaux in France, for example. The artists there brilliantly used the natural curves and contours of the rock to give their animals this amazing three-dimensional feel, creating these powerful visual stories. Then you jump over to Altamira in Spain, and they were using the bulges in the cave ceiling to make the bison look fleshy and real, probably for teaching young hunters or for rituals. So two different places, two totally distinct design solutions for the exact same challenge: how to communicate with power.
What's just incredible is that these early artists were, without even knowing it, writing the first rulebook for graphic design. They were using visual hierarchy, making the most important animals bigger. They were creating a sense of movement to tell a story. They even used a really limited color palette to get maximum contrast and impact. They were composing scenes, not just painting animals. This wasn't just art for art's sake, this was purpose-driven creation.
Okay, so they figured out communication, but what about an even more immediate problem? Just surviving the elements. This brings us to humanity's first real architectural projects, where the design challenge was, quite literally, life or death.
So, up in the Arctic, the challenges were just immense. Brutal cold, and absolutely no wood to build with. The design solution here is pure genius: the igloo. It uses the only material available, snow, and shapes it into a structurally perfect dome that resists the wind and traps body heat inside. This is a masterclass in the principle that form has to follow the climate.
Now let's totally shift gears and head to the grasslands. The problem here wasn't just wind, it was constant movement, so the solution had to be portable. And that's where we get the teepee and the yurt, absolute marvels of mobile design. They were lightweight, they were easy to set up and take down, and they were stable against the wind. In this case, design wasn't just about shelter, it was about the freedom to move.
And finally, in the forests, the design constraints changed completely. You've got tons of wood, but you also have threats. The solution? Build into the environment itself. Things like lean-tos and semi-underground pit houses use the landscape for both camouflage and insulation, creating shelters that were practically invisible.
So, what's the really crucial takeaway here? It's that these ancient shelters teach us these timeless design lessons. They optimized whatever local materials they had, they adapted to the specific climate, they were incredibly efficient, and maybe most importantly, they were perfectly sustainable. Everything was biodegradable, leaving zero waste, not because of some ideology, but because survival absolutely demanded it.
All right, so beyond communication and shelter, there was this third great design frontier: overcoming our own physical limitations. This, of course, led to the design of tools, the first true extensions of the human body.
What you're looking at here is what you could call the world's first industrial revolution, and it unfolded over millions of years. It started with a really simple, effective principle: a sharp edge is useful. But just look at the progression. The design evolves to the symmetrical hand axe, which shows a real understanding of ergonomics, how an object actually fits the human hand. Then, a huge leap forward with techniques like lavalo, which basically meant they were planning the final tool before they even struck the first stone. It's like a prehistoric manufacturing process. And finally, the ultimate game changer: composite tools.
And this right here, this represents a massive cognitive breakthrough. They weren't just shaping one material anymore. They realized that by combining different materials, like a sharp stone point, a wooden shaft, some kind of binding, they could create a system that was far more powerful than any of its individual parts. This is the birth of systems thinking.
And no tool illustrates this better than the atlatl, or spear thrower. The problem was really simple. The human arm is not a cannon. Hunting large animals with just a spear was super dangerous and pretty inefficient. The solution was this beautiful little piece of mechanical engineering, a simple lever that essentially turned the human arm into a high-powered launcher, multiplying the force and speed of the throw.
So how much of a difference did it actually make? It extended the effective range of a spear by up to 3 times. Just let that sink in. 3 times. This wasn't just a small improvement, it was a revolution. It fundamentally changed the balance of power between hunter and prey, and it directly improved survival rates, all through brilliant design. So what does all this prehistoric stuff mean for us today? Well, these aren't just clever tricks from the past. These ancient solutions, the cave arts, the shelters, the tools, they laid the absolute groundwork for the core principles that guide every single designer working today.
You know, we talk about human-centered design like it's some new thing invented in Silicon Valley. But really, what is more human-centered than shaping a stone axe over generations and generations so it fits perfectly and comfortably in the palm of your hand for a critical task?
And what about sustainable design? We talk about it as this modern goal we're all striving for. But our ancestors, they practiced it by default. They built with what was around them and created shelters that would just naturally return to the earth. It was the ultimate closed-loop system, born not from ideology, but from pure necessity.
The connections are just so direct and undeniable. The visual communication of cave art, that's the ancestor of modern user interface design. The climate-responsive shelters are the foundation of environmental architecture. The evolution of the hand axe is the birth of ergonomic product design. And those composite tools, they represent the very first steps into complex systems design. It all started right here.
So the key takeaway from all of this is simple, but it's also pretty profound. Design, at its absolute core, was never about making things pretty. It's the fundamental human process for solving critical problems. It's about survival, it's about communication, and it has always been about improving the human condition.
Which leaves us with one final thought. Our prehistoric ancestors, they designed for survival against predators and the elements. Now the challenges have changed, but that fundamental need for good design hasn't gone anywhere. So that begs the question, what is the critical survival challenge that we are all designing for today?